Welcome to another episode of Get Wisdom. I'm Brian Kelly, along with Get Wisdom founder and director Carl Mollison. This week, we're going to dive deep into getting help with the coming financial crisis. That's right. So investors are currently worried about our economy being overdue for a serious recession, as history taught us always happens. Get Wisdom is here with a divine update on this. We explore the gathering signs of trouble, the massive amounts of money disappearing from the economy, the dark money being used to falsely prop up the markets, the possible timing of the next major downturn, how and why it is being manipulated to happen, and the wisdom of owning gold. Now, on that note, welcome, Carl.
Well, happy Friday.
Yeah.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Happy new decade. Happy 20s to the 20s.
It's going to be a bang-up year, so we'll see. Well, this is a topic people don't want to hear about. People don't like bad news, but if you live with blinders on, you pay in the end anyway. So you might as well be open to possibilities and factor things in and have the big picture in mind, because there's a reason we do this. It's not just to share things that we learn about that are concerning. It's to help wake people up so they get in the program, which is reaching out to the divine realm for assistance to raise up the interlopers. We need a lot of divine help here, and more all the time. And fewer people are religious in terms of practicing something that has actual meaning beyond just paying their respects with church attendance or something, but not actively thinking much about the role of God in the world and a partnership personally with the divine.
Let's get into it, Carl. We've got a lot to cover. There is much talk suggesting that we should be buying gold due to the threat of a global crash and likely end to the use of the paper money. Is there any truth to this? Should we be preparing in any way? And is there a timeline regarding this concern? That was a question you put to Creator.
All right, and this is the channeled answer from Creator. The value of gold has not gone away despite the many naysayers and financial advisors who look upon gold as a barbarous relic, for example, which reflects their disinterest and disdain for viewing gold as a store of wealth. But that is the reality. It is a consistent store of wealth over vast spans of time, whereas no currency created by a government has lasted for much more than a century. That is a very poor track record indeed, concerning stability of currency as a reliable store of wealth. We see gold continuing to have that distinction and become an increased haven of safety with coming financial turmoil. We cannot give you a timeline for this, as the forces that will bring this turmoil about are in a state of flux with their planning, and many things can happen. But the timing is the least certain. There have been many potential calamities that have been delayed, some due to intercession by the divine realm to help things keep stable for a time. But we can tell you that putting trust in gold as a long-term safe haven for saving will be rewarded handsomely in what is coming.
You know, I wish, Carl, we had 5 hours for this episode, because there's so much that could be covered for sure. You know, one of the things that I've learned in my studies is that the obsession with gold is based on the fact that there was an obsession on the part of the interlopers with gold, and in particular the Anunnaki, who mined it and coveted it for purposes of all kinds, including protection of their own planet. So that obsession with gold is ingrained in us deeply, and it's not going to go away anytime soon.
Well, and it also forms the basis of a kind of reality here. You know, what is more valuable, paper or something of a weightier nature? And that's part of the reason gold has value. It has many admired qualities.
Absolutely.
It's physically beautiful. It's very, very stable chemically. It doesn't rust. It won't degrade or disappear. It can be divisible into any kind of increments you want. You can't divide a painting into quarters or eighths or sixteenths.
Right.
You know,
and it's one of the best conductors known to anybody, basically.
Right. And you can't just make all of it that you might want. It's precious, it's scarce. And unlike money in currency form, it has an inherent stability for all of those reasons. But money you can churn out like there's no tomorrow. And that's what we've been doing for many, many, many years. And people don't talk about it much anymore. But we're blowing our budget out every single year here in the U.S., and we're printing money like never before, and all of which is going to come back to haunt us.
Well, we're going to talk about that some more, and Creator's going to talk about it some more. U.S. Creator, is Catherine Austin Fitts, who has the website Solari, correct in her analysis, starting from when she was Assistant Secretary of Housing, Federal Housing Commissioner, that $21 trillion has gone missing from, being secretly siphoned away from, U.S. government institutions like HUD? If so, who is benefiting, and is it still being done?
All right, and this again is something little talked about in financial circles, but she's not a conspiracy theorist. She's a mainstream person, but she stumbled into this and was amazed and very much disturbed by this disappearing money. This is what Creator says about it. This is correct, and is in actuality an understatement of the losses represented by this process of funneling money out of the government. This happens across the institutions and is particularly striking in the military and intelligence agency budgets. They are the largest of the black holes. It is not their appetite for money off the books is needed to carry out its operations. It is that it is funding the hidden cabal, in addition to the intelligence agencies themselves and their operatives worldwide, which need care and feeding and lots of money to bribe government officials and contract workers of all kinds to carry out clandestine work on their behalf. This extra appetite is a major drain on the world economy across the board, but is the way of things and is another way of tracking and verifying the existence of the hidden cabal. Money will simply not disappear on its own. It always goes somewhere and needs a reason for this to be. That is the way in which this will be revealed ultimately and its vast dimensions. This funneling of money off the ledgers, so to speak, continues unabated and may well escalate. It is at times of economic downturn that it can be ratcheted up, because the economic collapse of the moment makes a convenient cover story for a budget shortfall, when all of government must trim its sails a bit to ride out the period of shortfall and operate more economically for a time and reprioritize their functions to stay within bounds for a time as prudence dictates. All the while, the money is truly disappearing to the cabal in greater numbers and is a reason to undertake the undermining of the financial system on a regular basis. It creates a payoff for the hidden hand and provides a suitable distraction and explanation for the budgetary limitations.
We've seen this trend with a lot of these channelings that these estimates are always less than the actual amount. 21 trillion is not even the whole amount. So that's amazing.
Yeah, there's bad news and there's worse news, and you just think it's bad news, but it's actually worse news.
Yeah, and, they say follow the money. Another thing that you need to follow is drywall. I've heard rumors that huge chunks of drywall have disappeared into the hole somewhere. Where is that going? So it's not just money, it's also resources and finished end products that disappear into a black hole and can't be accounted for. So it's an interesting world we live in.
Yes, and sinister,
yes.
Unfortunately.
U.S. Creator, the influence of dark money, which is reportedly huge sums of cash invested mysteriously on certain days at certain times, is described as the reason the stock market keeps rising, propping up the economy. Is this newly printed money created out of thin air to create an investment bubble to enrich the cabal, and really a setup for a great crash when selling is done to pull the rug out from under?
Okay, well, this is something that I stumbled on because I got a newsletter from an investment firm who had come across this repeatable phenomenon that there are certain hours and days when someone makes huge investments in the market in buying stocks, and it makes the market expand. And they're offering services to clue you in on where and when this is done and how you can kind of piggyback along, because the market's going to rise when that happens. It's just part of the dynamics of the function of markets. When there are a lot of buyers, it drives prices up. So the market has been escalating to record highs, and everyone likes that, and they think that's wonderful. And the investment community knows that probably about 2/3 of that is driven by companies buying back their own shares.
Yes.
So they get money and they buy their own shares. It drives up the share price, and they make money by watching their share price escalate and purchasing their own shares along the way, because they can make money later. Yep. But it's a kind of a pyramid scheme.
Well, I know for a fact that high-speed traders ride the coattails of these transactions.
Yeah.
They look for them, they see them, they identify the early signs of them, and then they ride coattails, and they actually help drive the price up.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of stuff going on.
Well, and I mean, this isn't just kind of crazy, paranoid fantasy stuff. I mean, it's talked about now. And I just saw a thing the other day where they were admitting that the Fed is buying actual stock shares. They're not supposed to do that legally, but they're doing it, and no one is questioning it anywhere. But this is what Creator says about the dark money phenomenon that drives up the stock market. This is a completely accurate, intuitive perception of what is taking place. It is not simply commerce or clever manipulation by companies, even in collusion with one another to influence the indexes, for example, through coordinated share buybacks, for instance. This is done by creation of new money, and thereby dilutes the value of currency ultimately. But for a time, it creates the illusion of prosperity and growth and encourages more investment. And that is the purpose, to act as bait and as a lure for continued ongoing investment of earnings in retirement plans and with discretionary money to turn human productivity into an exaggerated wealth in the form of a bubble that can burst and plummet with a corresponding loss. This is cynical and sinister and will be a source of great harm to those putting their trust in the markets. All are rigged and all can be devastated when this is desired to happen. And it will be done in a way that those in the know will be pulling their money out first and quickly. So the small investors will be left holding the bag, so to speak, and suffer quite painful losses. That is the intended goal, to enrich the cabal and then punish the ordinary human investment community.
I could say a lot on this, Carl, but we got another long question here, and maybe we'll have some time just before the next break. You asked Creator, we know the derivative crisis in 2008 was caused by the bankruptcy of Bear Stearns and Lehman Brothers, and the subsequent refusal on the part of political and financial leaders to bail out these firms, causing a cascading series of margin calls that could not be met, and coming extremely close to having the entire global financial system freezing up and collapsing entirely. As such, this was a gun to the head of global politicians to allow all forms of money expansion, actually new money created out of thin air with no backing whatsoever other than debt, to proceed unchecked and unrestrained and even unaudited. As a result, the system was saved, air quotes. The big banks were bailed out, the American automotive industry was bailed out, etc. Did the extraterrestrial alliance fully intend to collapse the global financial system at that time, and was divine intervention the way it was prevented?
Yeah, okay, and Creator says, this indeed was a deliberate manipulation by the extraterrestrial alliance to bring things to a head that were looming but could have been contained. They do this at regular intervals. The whole notion of the economic cycle is a fallacy. It is clear history, numerically speaking, with the rise and fall of the markets with fairly regular periods of escalating values, reaching a peak, and then a recessionary period to cool things off and having a value reset to begin an eventual upward climb once again. These cycles are unnatural. They are the product of numerous financial manipulations of world economies and the tools of the banking system. All the while, there are predatory investors who are part of the cabal, the insiders who understand this is a game and are in on the rules and who short the markets at just the right time and then will reposition themselves once a bottom is in place to enjoy another run-up over a decade or so prior to a new downturn. This is how the hidden cabal keeps itself in luxury. They do so off the backs of everyone else, manipulating their economies and stripping away the spoils of the labor of many. To be sure, there are those who ride along in parallel if they can see the signs and piggyback onto the system. But it is all run with general unfairness, and for many people it is an unrecoverable disaster, particularly if they're nearing retirement and are counting on life savings that might be decimated with an economic downturn, if they are in harm's way of losing share value in their investments and fail to act in time. There is much mind control manipulation as well to make people feel complacent and to stick to the old adages that because the markets can't be predicted, it is better to stay invested because otherwise you will bail out in fear at just the wrong time and the market will turn and run to the positive and leave you behind, and you will have lost out truly because your losses are unrecoverable. That idea can work for individuals with a long timeline because they will be able to recoup losses over time. But for those in advanced years, it can be quite devastating. There was a divine intervention to prevent the downturn in 2008 from causing a global collapse that would be truly catastrophic. So bad as it was and painful for many people, it was survived for the majority, at least enough to limp back into action and begin to rebuild from there, and many have done well in at least getting back to where they were, aside from having lost a decade or more of their productivity.
You know, Carl, I haven't recommended a book in this whole series that we've been doing, but I need to recommend one now. If you have not read The Creature from Jekyll Island, I consider that a must read. Literally every student in high school should be reading this thing. Of course, they aren't. G. Edward Griffin is the author. He's 88 years old and he's still working productively. He just came out with the 5th edition of this book that talks about the manipulations in 2008. So you can get The Creature from Jekyll Island at Amazon. You can get even a audio version of it if you want to listen to your car, but that's a must read.
Well,
I don't know if you're familiar with that book, Carl.
Well, I have not read it myself personally.
Yeah.
And this is also depressing and demoralizing to realize we're just deer in the headlights always with these things.
Yeah.
And to think that our vaunted institutions don't know what they're doing because they're being mind-muddled by manipulation to look the other way, to be confused, to work at cross purposes, to do just the wrong thing at just the right time, to screw things up and not have good solutions and answers and be proactive and head things off and so on. It just creates quite a nightmare. Yep. Because we're so vulnerable.
Well, we have to
crosshairs.
We're right at a break, Carl, so we'll have to be back in just right after this.
All right.
Welcome back to the second segment of Get Wisdom in the new year 2020. Happy New Year, everybody. You asked Creator based on a dream that I had actually about over a decade ago. Brian, myself, had a dream vision around the time of a destroyed Chicago, which was kind of disturbing. And Creator said in an earlier channeling that this was the probability at that time. Thankfully, that probability has changed, we're told. Would this have been the outcome if the divine realm did not intervene to save the global financial system in 2008?
Okay, and Creator says the two were not related. The prophetic dream was relating to the annihilation, not to the financial collapse. There is a connection between these two in that the annihilation will follow a financial collapse, but one is not a guarantee of the other. There have been a series of financial collapses of varying magnitudes, so that difficulty and unpleasantness is to be expected. It is the norm and it is routine. So what we can say is that the timing of the 2008 downturn was not meant to be the final push resulting in human annihilation.
Whew, okay, well, one down. Some good news anyway. You asked Creator We know the divine must work through humans and human institutions, inspiring key players to consider alternatives that are opposed by extraterrestrial alliance mind control. In 2008, the housing bubble popped and contributed hugely to the crisis. In 2020, we have the student loan bubble and the growing food crisis. We did not have a food crisis in 2008. Perhaps if central banks again bailed out the banks and investors holding all the student loan debt, as they did for the housing debt holders in 2008, the game could keep going. But without actual grain in storage bins, nobody is going to want to buy agricultural futures. Will we once again see a cascading of failed margin calls leading to the very collapse of the global financial system that was avoided in 2008? Can Creator comment on whether this is an accurate outlook?
All right, and Creator tells us the differences you point out are correct, but there are always many parts of the financial system under great strain, and there are many perturbations and distortions in the workings of the financial system to keep things in a very fragile mode. The great amplification of debt through the use of derivatives is the number one scourge that threatens the system always. Any aspect of the markets where large sums of money are being manipulated through excess leverage represents a time bomb that can go off at any moment, and when more than one segment of the financial world blows up, this can be a huge calamity in a hurry. So whether the food crisis is serious or not, there are many, many other contenders for being pressure points to drag down the economy and precipitate a financial crisis.
Oh boy. So we had good news, but then we're back to the bad news. Now, people, realize that the business cycle, which Creator earlier said is a fallacy, right? That the business cycle actually doesn't exist. It's a wholly manipulated artifact. But yet it is a persistent manipulated artifact. And manipulation has a cause, it has perpetrators, and they're still at it, and they're almost certain to bring down the pain again.
Yes. Yes, and it's a game, and it is the way of life for them to bleed us dry again and again and again. So Creator said in some context, I'm not sure it's in what we're talking about today, but it's sort of like they're milking the cow, and the artful challenge for them is to milk the cow but not kill it. And so we're always in this kind of dance where we're being stretched to the max, and usually we can bounce back, but it's painfully slow, and not everyone bounces back, and that's the problem. And there's still tons of people out of work after the 2008 recession.
Oh, sure. I know people never recovered. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You ask Creator, it seems as though there's an effort to always create pretext for any aggressive action the extraterrestrial alliance wishes to see carry out. Essentially, blame the victim. Irresponsible home buyers were blamed for overextending themselves and deserve to be ruined as a result, just as foolish and short-sighted students, air quotes, borrowing tens of thousands to get unmarketable degrees deserve their comeuppance and lifelong debt burden they cannot pay back. Can Creator comment on this ET strategy and why we humans so easily fall for it?
All right, and Creator tells us the wisdom of old was, quote, neither a borrower nor a lender be, unquote. That wisdom is borne out today when the role of both becomes so greatly magnified through the distortion of pricing for things like higher education and the ready availability of capital engineered by the political system conspires to lure people into a false sense of security, thinking they are gaining something of tremendous value, but instead digging a hole for themselves they may never climb out of. At least a home is a physical entity that can be enjoyed and lived in and provides basic necessities. A diploma may well be a passport to a better future, but there is no guarantee and may prove to be useless. This is orchestrated to happen, to cause an inflation of prices as a drain on the economy, and to manipulate people with mind control to give them the expectation they must go to some authority figure who will then tell them what they need to know and show them how to learn it and pay an extravagant sum for the privilege. This is rather ridiculous on its face. It is an archaic system that serves the state. It serves the hidden cabal, and it acts as a drain on the economy and creates a personal burden for the students as well and their families throughout their lives in many cases. There are many such imperatives that people are culturally influenced through what others are doing to come to want and to try to acquire. There is a huge contingent of manipulation always in the background, making people follow certain lifestyles and to feel inadequate unless they do. The availability of ready money through borrowing is highly addictive and a very slippery slope. The advent of the credit card was a great corruption. It has its practical value, and when used judiciously, it is a conveyance of money electronically and has many conveniences built in. But to use a credit card as a source to live on is a trap, because the debt will be compounded with interest at such a rate you will likely not escape. This is sinister and a kind of evil. In the old system, there was a careful scrutiny when people wanted money on loan for something. They would have to meet face to face with a banker who would assess their net worth, their ability to pay, and get a sense of whether this made sense within a reasonable budget and would turn down the loan if such was not the case. But today there is no filter and people can easily get in over their heads. That is a deliberately intended scourge to encumber everyone in debt of their own making, to get people addicted to consumerism and to shopping and thereby increasingly vulnerable if there were an economic downturn and they lost their job, for example, and were unable to service their growing debt. This is a deliberate orchestration. It is not generosity that the banks let people buy new cars when they're barely getting by economically. The rapaciousness is a programmed manipulation at all levels of society, so all are complicit in the group decline because of growing debt.
Well, certainly debt is the number one problem. And yet, at the same time, our whole monetary system is based on debt. And in fact, the debt exceeds all the dollars that currently exist in the world, so it can never be paid down. It really is sinister.
Yeah. And that is why it's crazy as well. And people occasionally will comment on this, but the congressional system turns a blind eye again and again and again. They just kick the can down the road. So they pass a continuing resolution to allow the budget ceiling to be exceeded yet one more time. And that happens again and again and again.
Absolutely.
And we're living way beyond our means. We're totally bankrupt. The world is bankrupt. And we're in hock up to our eyeballs with all the debt that's owed. There's no way to pay it back. And the only way is to destroy the current value of the currencies, the fiat currencies that are in use, to essentially wash the debt away by depleting the value of money altogether. And everyone loses in that kind of scenario.
Absolutely. We'll explore some of the reasons for this from this next question. So you asked, Creator, the U.S. Congress and parliaments all over the world are extremely divided along partisan lines, not just in the U.S. This does not bode well for being able to work together to stem another 2008-like crisis. Toss in the need to keep massive corruption and evil indulgences out of the spotlight, and it looks like there is little hope of any political solution to a repeat of 2008. Can Creator comment on to what extent this is all intentional on the part of the extraterrestrial alliance, and does the divine itself have fewer levers to pull in order to stave off the collapse that was prevented in 2008?
All right, and Creator tells us there are always limits to what we can do. We must follow the human lead in the first instance and allow them to make mistakes and to get themselves into trouble. We cannot stop humans from making choices because that would violate their free will. When humans prey on one another or their institutions, they will be vulnerable and they will be harmed. The key is being prudent and using an interaction with the divine to help sustain you with guidance and support to avoid reckless choices. That is doable and is a good way to live one's life. It helps in terms of avoiding the temptations of excess, as well as staying calm and clear-minded when tough choices might need to be made to deal with an economic crisis. and find a way to keep going.
Creator, in an earlier question we answered in this show, said that every decade or so, there's a downturn. And, we're on a record growth period right now in terms of expansion. The Great Recession in 2008 was in 2008. Well, that's now 12 years ago. So this expansion's been going on for a long time, and we know that it can't go on forever.
Yeah, because they'll pull the trigger and cause another downturn. Yeah. And everyone's expecting this one's going to be a doozy because there's so many bubbles that have exceeded rational justification, and the debt levels are so massive and across the board. There's record defaults on auto loans now. There's a huge overhang of unpaid auto loans that people can't afford to maintain. There's a glut of automobiles as a result. So those kinds of things start to ripple through the economy and bring problems. There was just a big thing that happened within the last few months that hardly got any attention in the press whatsoever. But the interest rate on overnight loans, there's a kind of a repo market, they call it, and it spiked into double digits. And the Fed went in the next morning and put in over $100 billion.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, to keep money available, because they ran out of money is what happened. Right. And so the interest rates started to skyrocket because the loans weren't repayable. Yeah. And so ever since then, they have been putting in $160 billion a week of new money into this one segment of the market that's esoteric to most people. They have no idea it even exists, but it keeps money flowing around the world. And they have to do this. They have to. There's no question. Right. And so they're pumping new dollars into the system. And it's only common sense to realize this is not going to end well.
Yeah, this is the result of the 2008 crisis, because there was a lot of legislation that took place, not just in the United States as well, that basically took off all restraints on money creation, and as well as took away any kind of visibility on money creation, so that we don't get the money figures that we used to either reported to the public. So now they can expand to the sky without any oversight, without any auditing, without any restraint, but they need to, because this is the system that's been created. They have to keep this game afloat, and the only way to do that is to keep printing more and more and more money. The problem with that is that it's highly inflationary, and at some point the prices are going to start. We're seeing it now. We're seeing inflation going up across the board, and that at some point it's going to exceed what people can afford in terms of their food expenses. They've kept gasoline prices, and Creator's going to mention that, I think, in the next segment, stable. But that's about the only thing that's stable anymore in terms of prices.
Well, and again, it's a game. It's a question of their orchestration, what they choose to allow to happen, and what they might constrain just to keep appearances up.
Yes.
But when they want to let it burst, all bets are off then. And it becomes ugly very, very quickly. And you wake up and the Dow is down 800 points or 1,000 points. And that starts going on day after day. And there have been times in the past when they've actually shut down the market just to help it cool off a little bit and convene behind closed doors and take emergency measures. This is what happened in 2008.
Well, there is an emotional aspect, obviously, to the investing. And there could be, an exuberance or a panic that can take place that can, have people just selling everything all at once. Well, that is the definition of gridlock and collapse. So a cooling off period is warranted, absolutely, in those situations.
But once a big drop and a reset to a much lower level of valuations happens, then there's a long, slow grind to get back to where you were. And that's what can play out over the course of even a decade of time, just to recoup your losses.
Well, we've seen that, I think, since 2008, because like you said, a lot of people never even They've either barely got back to where they were, or they're still behind the eight ball.
Well, in actuality, because of the declining value of the dollar, having the same amount of dollars in the bank, having the same valuation in the stock market, doesn't mean the same thing.
Oh, yeah, because of inflation.
Because it's cheaper dollars. So you might have the same number of dollars, but they're only worth half of what they were 10, 15 years ago. And this is just crazy. It's just a bizarre system. We used to be pegged to a gold standard, and that was rational. And when Nixon got rid of that, that opened the floodgates to the manipulators big time.
Yeah. Well, we'll definitely be talking about gold in the next segment, so be sure to come back for that. Check us out at getwisdom.com. You can check out our healing services on our menu. Also, download the ebook on the LHP, the Lightworker Healing Protocol, because that is the solution to all of this stuff. So get it at getwisdom.com/LHP, and we'll be right back with more Get Wisdom right after this. Welcome back to the final segment of Get Wisdom. We're talking about the coming financial crisis, which is pretty much a certainty because it's been a certainty in the past, and it's just a matter of time before it's going to happen as the past is prologue.
Yes, this is an interesting period of time where there's kind of a euphoria in the news all the time about the economy, but yet there's disquiet.
Yeah.
In many sectors, and good reasons for that, because all is not well. There are many problems that are looming, and they're not being addressed. The government, as usual, is doing very little of any value, and they're not doing anything to rein in the excesses and put in safeguards. They've taken safeguards away for various reasons. And
there's an excess of politics going on.
Yep, an excess of politics. That's a good description of it.
We'll address that right now. U.S. creator. Some speculate Trump's impeachment is a shallow and desperate strategy to create a pretext whereby Trump and Pence can eventually be forcefully removed from office and the 2020 elections actually canceled, with the Democrats in power and a President Pelosi or other Democrat-appointed president presiding over martial law control of the country. Is there any danger of this actually happening?
Well, it's an interesting question. It wasn't one of mine, but a lot of people would cheer with the prospect of this happening.
No doubt. I know quite a few who would. My own family, for that matter.
Yeah. Well, it certainly would create a lot of turmoil. Well, this is what Creator says. This could well happen with a financial collapse of great magnitude because there would be tremendous political turmoil. The consequences and the failure of government officials and institutions would be massive and shocking. It is in such situations that political turmoil comes to a boil, and almost anything can happen, including massive civil unrest, necessitating martial law. The question really will be determined by the extraterrestrials as to how badly they want to see humanity suffer at this particular point in time. If they keep the system going, they can keep milking the cow. Here we go. If they kill the cow, that game will have to stop for a while, and they will not gain as great a reward, siphoning money away from a much, much smaller pool of surviving investors. So in some respects, the severity of the financial downturn will be a harbinger of a worsening globally on many fronts that could well include human annihilation at the peak.
Well, we certainly want to avoid that. So let's hope and pray, people. That's what this is really all about, that we don't get that kind of an extreme downturn, that maybe it is a bit more attenuated.
Well, we know right now that is the plan.
Yes.
The question is, when will they pull the trigger?
Right.
And we also know there's going to be a softening up across the board with many calamities and catastrophes happening to cripple us economically and cause disarray and disenchantment and distractions. People are devastated with huge hurricanes coming through. They don't have much extra time to think about how to govern the country better or whatever. They're worried about their families and their own possessions and so on. So this is going on around the world with increased natural disasters. We're poised in facing another economic downturn That could be a major, huge one that presages a worsening of things to the point where the annihilation will be triggered, because that's what they're wanting to do. We don't know exactly.
Well, we're here to try to prevent that, and you can help in that regard, so stay tuned and help us out for sure. You asked Creator, is there any danger of the opposite happening, where Trump gains the upper hand and uses the sham impeachment as a pretext for Republican martial law dictatorship? Are the ETs playing a game here and allowing some freedom for the outcome to go either way because they won't care who's president in the end? Or is this evidence of their losing control as a result of divine intervention?
All right, and Creator tells us suspension of civil liberties often accompanies a crisis. The latest example of this was in 2001 with the 9/11 attacks and the subsequent imposition of many, many new laws restricting many choices in life with respect to mobility, financial transactions, and many personal choices without government oversight, at least. Things can worsen from here at any time if there is civil unrest, because then the overriding authority will be maintaining law and order, and the rights of the individual once again may well disappear. There is no particular bias here in what the extraterrestrial alliance would like to see. It is all a game for them, and is created by them to begin with. All of the political furor between the Democrats and Republicans is ginned up by mind control manipulation, and the reality is any politicians will be under their thumb and manipulated extensively to do their bidding without any conscious awareness this is so. It truly does not matter who is president of the United States or the senior official of any other nation. Those in positions of power are allowed to be there and often maneuvered through orchestrated campaigns and a process of their personal development to bring them along in the political arena to groom them, in effect, for service. The chief requirement for inclusion, as for membership in the political hierarchy, is whether or not you are manipulatable by the extraterrestrial alliance. If you are a free thinker, you will be rejected. Whether there is one or another political perspective makes little difference to the extraterrestrials. They work both sides of the equation with their maneuvering, and they manipulate everyone by turns as administrations come and go and political power changes hands over the decades. What never changes is that it is humanity losing at every turn with a continual tightening of the grip to siphon more and more gains and benefits away from humanity, and the people left with a gradually lowered standard of living.
I think the main message here is that it's the ET Alliance that really ultimately decides how this is going to play out, and that if the economy keeps going strong clear up until Election Day, it's pretty much a foregone conclusion that Trump will get reelected. But if the collapse happens before that, it's probably a foregone conclusion he won't get reelected. So once again, it's up to the ET Alliance who they want in charge.
Yes, and the point, sadly, is, as Creator points out, it really doesn't matter which party is in charge, because things never change.
Right.
They change in the rhetoric.
Yeah.
You know, they change in what the politicians talk about. You know, the feel good, make nice, you know, let's help the downtrodden, let's help the minorities and the people with gender issues and the feminine equality and so on. And it gets a lot of talk, and there may be some laws passed. But the broad running of the country is never done well, and the military mayhem continues under any administration.
Yes.
And so you have Obama with the Nobel Peace Prize in hand within weeks of attaining the presidency. And he'd done little to really help on that front. He'd been a senator for, I don't know, a couple of years or a year, and was an Illinois politician, a local politician. So he had never done anything of any import prior to his presidency. And then during the presidency, I've seen it commented that the U.S. bombed more countries since World War II under Obama.
Yeah.
So something
Organs
doesn't
dropped
fit
during
here.
Obama's 8 years than the entirety of World War II. It's like, what?
Yeah.
And he won the Nobel Peace. And in fact, I've asked, people who are Obama fans, family, friends, what have you, why did he get the Nobel Peace Prize? And nobody has an answer.
Yeah. Well, that's because it's all manipulated.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is just the way of the world. We're like pieces on a chessboard, and they move us around for effect. It's a game. They're playing a game. It's like a virtual reality game with human beings as the pieces, the tokens.
Well, we need to talk about solutions, Carl. You asked Creator, how can prayer in the divine realm keep this crisis from developing fully? Is an ongoing stalemate between partisan factions our best hope for avoiding the worst outcome?
All right. Creator tells us your only hope of getting through all that is to have a divine partnership underway. So we're enabled to act more quickly with every new turn of events because your wishes will be on record and we'll have the intentions of many, many humans to work with. It is dangerous to wait until the crisis is at hand because time then will be short and the effectiveness of divine entreaties will be at a low ebb. It will be people praying in desperation in the midst of great fear and often a large disbelief in the power of the divine and even the worthiness of the humans themselves to obtain the divine intervention to save the day. The political gridlock is orchestrated to happen, so it is not serving humans nor the divine agenda. It simply is and must be reckoned with going forward. It is all wasted effort, wasted motion, and a distraction to keep people focused on irrelevant issues and goals that have little meaning to begin with.
Well, we're driving right toward the end of the show, so let's get this last question in. It's the biggest one. What practical advice does Creator have for preparing for the coming financial crisis?
All right. And Creator says there are many things written about dealing with financial catastrophe, all of which may be applicable depending on local circumstances and conditions. Maintaining as great an amount of savings as possible is always prudent, and investment in gold is the conventional catastrophe hedge, because even with currency collapse, precious metals like gold and silver retain their value and so can be counterbalanced to a portfolio quite nicely. Many financial advisors have been recommending for years now to have 10 to 20% of savings as gold because it is the premier chaos hedge being accepted around the world. In fact, the prime scenario of the interlopers is to arrange a financial reset of the gold price to make it catapult in value. This immediately makes those nations with large gold repositories, like China and the U.S., the most affluent and in a position of superiority. Those holding dollars under such an eventuality would be the losers. That is why it is important to position oneself in advance of an economic downturn leading to a gold reset, as that will be pointed out as an inevitable and best way to reconfigure things to return to global stability of the financial system. Having cash on hand is also prudent because if the financial system locks up, there will be severe constraints on commerce and the availability of goods and services will be constrained. But people will still take dollars in exchange for goods they have available.
It's probably not a bad idea that people maybe fill their pantries too. A lot of people, most people have like less than 3 days worth of food in their home. You should probably have more like 3 weeks to a month's worth at least, I'm thinking.
Yep. Can it hurt? Can it hurt?
No, definitely not. Be sure to check out getwisdom.com and tell us a little bit about the LHP, Carl, and how it can help to save all this.
Well, it's designed to raise the interlopers, to raise their minds and hearts, to heal them. And that is how we can get them to withdraw and leave us be. And then we can have a sane world once again. We've been told again and again, it is doable. But humans have to request it, and they have to request it in numbers. So we have a number of practitioners using our protocol, and it does healing each and every time it's enacted for the interlopers as well as humanity. And it's the ultimate answer, we're told. And in fact, the way the world will be saved. But we're in a race against time.
Yes, we are.
And it's not a certainty that we'll win. We need more people to do prayer work and to do healing. So you're all invited. This is something anyone can do.
Well, we've lost the race against time for this episode, Carl. Thanks for tuning in, and Happy New Year, everybody. We'll see you next week.
All right. Be well.